good morning everyone. It's 10 a.m. We will start our 11th seminar on fundamental rights and duties in times of pandemic. The event today will be all in English. There will be no translation. It's be transmitted by YouTube through the website of the Institute of Lawyers of Bahia. The event is being recorded and will then be available on YouTube. On behalf of the Institute of Lawyers of Bahia and Institute of Constitutional Law of Bahia, I would like to greet the speakers and thank them for having accepted the invitation. We are very happy and honored with the participation of all of you today here with us. Today we will have 5 lectures. The first one, Professor Jan de Groef, on Challenge for Education Rights and Education Policy in a Post-Pandemic Era. The second one, Professor Gary Jacobs, on Education for Global Leadership. The third one, Professor Heitor Gogolino de Souza, on Education and COVID-19. The fourth one, Professor Antonio Pedro Barbazome, on the theme, Challenge for Higher Education in a Post-Pandemic Era. And the fifth and last lecture with Professor Nina Ranieri. How is public education in Brazil during the pandemic, scenarios and challenges? Now, I would like to give the floor to Professor Rodolfo Pamplona. Professor Rodolfo Pamplona, good morning. President of the Academy of Legal Letters for the opening greeting.
Thank you, Professor Carlos Ratis. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and an honor to open this virtual seminar on fundamental rights and duties in times of pandemic. It's a new experience to us to make a virtual seminar only in English without translation, but I think it's a good step in our new normal that we are building in these times that we are here. How can I say that in English? We are so isolated, so it's a good time to learn and to talk. Ladies and gentlemen, it's open, and now I return the floor to Professor Carlos Ratis.
Thank you a lot, Professor Rodolfo Pamplona. Now, I would like to turn the conference over to Professor Saulo Casale, coordinator of the graduate program at the Faculty of Law of the Federal University of Bahia, for an initial greeting. Professor Saulo Casale.
I would like to say only welcome to all our participants, Professor Gary, Professor Heitor, Professor Nina, Professor Pedro Barbazome, and also Professor Jan de Groef. It's a great pleasure to receive all of you here today. We started with this kind of meetings some weeks ago. It's our edition number 11, and we invited more than 60 people to stay with us discussing all the aspects of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 impacts in our world, in juridical field, and now educational field. And I believe that your contributions today will be great for us. We published one book with the contributions, written contributions from the speakers. The next book, the second one, we will launch next week. And we invite you to send to us some written contributions to allow us to publish the third edition. We will publish through the Amazon publisher a version in English too. So we established the end of this month, June 30, to receive all the contributions, and it's an initiative of the legal institutions in our state, Bahia, the Institute of Lawyers, the Constitutional Law Institute, the postgraduate program of the Federal University of Bahia, and the Academy of Legal Letters of Bahia. So we are very proud, very, very happy to receive all of you, and we are here to hear you and your lessons today. So I believe that Carlos will show the rules of our work today, and after we can start, and welcome.
Thank you, Professor Saulo. Before the start of the lectures, I would like to talk about the rules of our seminar. Each speaker will have a maximum of 15 minutes to make his presentation. After each lecture, we will give the floor to Professor Saulo Casali to make brief considerations about each exhibition. Questions will be sent through YouTube chat and forwarded to speakers at the end.
And
So,
our transmission is also transmitted by YouTube.
yes.
And some questions can be put there, and we will have the possibility to, at the end, to answer, to give the floor to the speakers to answer the questions.
Yes. So, let's start the lectures. We call for his lecture, my dear Professor Jan de Groef. I had the honor of being a student of Professor Jan de Groef twice at the University of Antwerp in Belgium and in Lisbon at the event organized by Professor Barbazome. Professor Jan de Groef has twice delivered lectures at our Faculty of Law at Federal University of Bahia. Professor Jan de Groef is the president of the European Education Laws and Policy Association, professor at the College of Europe, Bruges, Belgium, and at the University of Tilburg, Netherlands, and the National Research University High School of Economics, Moscow, Russia. Present for the right to education and former UNESCO, chargé de mission, honorary commissioner of the government, the universities of Belgium, Flemish community. Professor Jan de Groef will speak on challenges of education rights and educational policy in the post-pandemic era. Professor de Groef, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our event. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Carlos, Professor Ratis. I have to confess, I'm not so in favor of online conferences. I prefer meet people physically, to embrace all people if possible, not all of them in the audience, but several of them, and to meet people, well, in person. But anyway, it's a privilege to be here, and it gives us indeed opportunities. But I have to excuse myself, as Professor Ratis knows. I have to leave earlier than foreseen the conference, because I'm a member of the jury of a doctoral commission, and I have to be there as a promoter of one of my doctoral students, what unfortunately is also online, an online doctoral defense, can you imagine? Anyway, thanks so much, Professor Ratis, Carlos Ratis, to organize this meeting, what's also reflecting your leadership and the leadership of your university. 3 parts. First, facts, figures, and risks. Second, how to screen and assess the responses. And 3, what about the future? Each of the 3 chapters will, I guess, cover 5 minutes and not more. The overall title of my lecture could be, "The right to education cannot be postponed." And does this disruptive COVID-19 crisis lead to a future policy? So it's hard to imagine at the time of the highest peak, 149 of the 196 UN member states have closed all of the major part of their schools and universities. This lockdown affects 91.3% of all pupils, enrolled pupils worldwide. What means 1.6 billion children. So what does that mean? That means that learning progress and the ability to learn are compromised. Risk of dropout increases alarmingly. The socio-economic decline directly affects both educational establishments and families. Children with learning needs risk being even more disadvantaged. Throughout Europe, the number of reports of domestic violence against children has risen sharply since the lockdown. So I should quote many figures, but no time. So it is dramatic. It never happened in history, never. And do not expect that the post-pandemic epoch will start until vaccines are discovered and distributed worldwide. That means we have to realize that strategic options will be needed for a very long time. The first distressing consequence is the widening of the already existing gap of inequality between pupils. Just one figure. 826 million of pupils worldwide have no access to a household computer. And 43% do not have access to internet, according to the figures of the UNESCO Institute of Statistics. But in Europe, 10% of the households do not have access to internet. I did my homework, Professor Ratis. I did some research on Brazil. So almost 70% of the people over age of 10 have access to internet in Brazil. 75% of municipalities have access to internet, and at home, mobile access is predominant. But there are so many differences in internet connectivity among the regions within the country and among households in the rural and the urban areas. And doing some research about, well, the very relevant example of Brazil for many reasons, COVID-19 widens the education gap between rich and poor. The disparities in availability of resources between schools and between private institutions and public institutions, the private institutions are having been able to partner with online services, and public schools have to deal with the socio-economic challenges of many of their students whose parents lost their income. So we cannot deny, and there are several Brazilian reports on this inequality of the country and creating two parallel realities, the private and the public sector. And using PISA quite often, checking the Brazil averages of the OECD PISA tests on quality and on output of education, is causing even more dramatic differences throughout the country, comparing income levels and regions. So it's a big issue on quality and on equality. At the same time, education world is coping with those challenges in a remarkable way. Let us be optimistic. And we have to honor parents, schools, teachers, principals. Universities and schools have demonstrated a remarkable responsibility and commitment in adopting measures supporting the right to a continued learning in an area, and we have to be very frank and open, in an area, namely education area, that traditionally does not have a culture of digital or distance education, remote work and schooling. So education sector is already deprivileged vis-a-vis the digital society. So what does that mean? That means that using the etymology of the word crisis. What means crisis? According to the Latin and the Greek sense. Crisis means what is needed, what point at which change must come, need for change. The point at which change must come. Krinan in Greek means to decide, to judge. That's interesting. So let us use this etymology of crisis on what is being decided and what are the challenges. So governments were challenged to provide support, and I made some research Europe-wide. They took, most governments took immediate measures to support the most disadvantaged families, replacing school meals, buying laptops on a massive scale for certain groups of pupils, using TV channels for the benefit of all pupils, free Wi-Fi for children without internet, delivering of non-digital material at schools, but also, and that's even more important, remedial actions when necessary, that becomes vital. So summer school, organizing summer schools, organizing tailor-made courses for pupils in small groups, and so on and so on. I guess you are familiar with the measures the Brazilian Ministry of Education has already carried out or are in progress. I have the report of May of 29, a couple of weeks ago, of days ago, with a quite interesting list of measures in the higher education sector on extending deadlines for formalizing registrations. I'm quite sure that Professor Ranieri will focus on these issues. On the tests, postponing of the tests, the distribution of food, the form of kits, vacancies in distance professional qualification courses, and so on. And I looked at the clarification by the National Education Council, very interesting, referring to the Brazilian legislation, namely the law of guidelines and basis of national education, admitting the performance of activities at distance and in a virtual environment. Quite interesting to screen this legislation. Reorganizing also the school schedules, the academic calendar, replace face-to-face subjects with classes to use information and communication, media and technologies, and so. So the law is quite opening several opportunities. But I would focus just one minute on the legislative technique and on education law perspective. And permit me to open the needs for the next generation of education law, but counts also for other countries, for most countries. And let me formulate 3 concerns. First, the legal recognition and the broadening of autonomy and accountability of schools. Coping with crisis. Guarantee more room for flexibility and for alternatives introduced by schools, taking into account the principles of inclusivity and of quality. Second, the legislator should implement in a most efficient and immediate way procedures of consultation and consultation with all stakeholders, with education actors, before sanctioning new law. And 3, in the longer term, after the period of emergency laws, we have to finish as soon as possible the period of emergency laws. We have to rethink the global regulatory framework in the education sector. What a challenge for education lawyers and professors in education sector, chiefly dealing with the law. And comparative education law and the best legal practices are so prominent. And I definitely will welcome Antonio Pedro Barbas Omem, Professor Omem, and Professor Gina Ranieri to confirm this need for comparative education law, so prominent. And second, there is a need for legal action at the international level. Wow, how does that sound? Well, comparative research in the legal branch is stressing the need for the negotiation with the telecom sector to offer zero tariff education traffic to national learning platforms and systems for online learning services and digital library services. That's ambitious. And there is a second ambition. One of my doctoral students in South Africa is dealing with the unavailability of textbooks in schools and universities. Why? Because they are too expensive and they are not accessible in local languages. So there is a strategy for cheaply translating and reproducing textbooks. But there is a contradiction or a confrontation between education law and IP law, copyright law, intellectual property law. We should, and one of my students again will give room for further research on this issue. We should make sure that international copyright law must comply with the idea of facilitating access to textbooks in schools and universities. My last chapter. What about the future? There is good news. There is excellent news. Namely, those exceptional times have to be regarded as a unique opportunity. Namely, a need for a well-considered, but an urgent plan for sustainability and long-term objectives. Education systems need to be reformed in the short, medium, and the long term. That means that strategies should be developed to enable the transition of a transitional period to a longer term objective. And I can refer, of course, to the Article 214 of the Brazilian Constitution, referring to a 10-year national education plan. The law, I quote, Article 214, the law shall establish a 10-year national education plan. I should now focus a little bit more on the Constitution and education, but no time, no evidence. But this 10-year national education plan, if I'm correct, the last is from 2014. I have here the Portuguese version of that law, targeting indicators by the year of 2023. So there are many reasons to invite public authorities to consider the possibility to have a new, definitely new, 10-year, 20 years, and a 30 years plan for education for the future. Let me focus very shortly, just 3 minutes, on what are the major axes of that strategy for the long term. I will limit myself to 4 main action lines, 4 ambitions. First, the education system will become hybrid. Education system has to be organized in a hybrid sense. What does that mean? That means that the organization of the learning process will integrate contact and distance learning, more personalized learning pathways, new forms of open school. That means that distance learning now can lay a solid foundation for more technical, pedagogical innovations, more open and flexible learning environments, and a more vibrant education system. I know from research and from history of education, education is a conservative castle, and we have to break down walls to make it more open, to make it more innovative for the future. So we have to plead for the diversification of diversity. School systems should be more diversified. Uniformity kills. Uniformity kills quality and equality. And we need a strategy, long-term strategy on education innovation. That's my first axe. My second major ambition and major axe is trust parents. Trust parents. Schools have to rely exclusively on parents for a longer period of time. They deserve every confidence and appreciation, although one will not remain blind to the complexity of complying with parental duty, a fortiori not in vulnerable families. And I have to agree, further teaching and learning cannot be limited to online resources. The role of schools in the lives of children and young people cannot be underestimated. The place where children learn, where they have their social contacts, play and relax and find support. But the parental choice and parental freedom should be respected. For instance, organizing more home education. And the digitalization will offer new opportunities. Third axe, teachers. Well, in Belgium, there is a quite interesting practice since 2-3 months, namely, most persons are going out of their house at 8 o'clock in the evening, applauding the medical personnel, doctors, nurseries, and appreciating their commitments and their support for the COVID crisis. Well, we should take into consideration to applaud daily management and the teaching staff. They also deserve the daily applause. Teachers were challenged to turn their creativity into concrete measures. They were supposed to develop alternative teaching methods, often with a very limited training in distance learning. PISA again shows that only 43% of teachers within the OECD member states are prepared for the use of ECT themselves, either in the classroom or through learning processes. So I have other figures, but you can find them quite easily on the international data. So there is a need for a massive support to enable teachers to get a sufficient digital attitude and skills through different tools, and most prominently through continued technical training should be provided on a short term, medium term, and long term. 4, the last one, fourth axe, is role of research and of science to fulfill those goals. The role of the researcher and of the scientists on all those long-term strategies. Well, unlike healthcare, for example, education has no tradition of science-driven innovation. Ignoring the need for science-based forward thinking, but science-based forward thinking. Ignoring this need will make national policy miserable. So I launched several ideas on long-term strategies within the European framework, and if there is an interest, we can send this to the organizers. So, and again, that counts also for Brazil, not just strengthening research, educational research, but also decentralizing. As you know, half of the knowledge produced by Brazil, of the scientific knowledge produced by Brazil, is generated in Sao Paulo, because that state has such a dense research infrastructure. So quite interesting, very exciting to read all those figures. So my very last word: all stakeholders in education, training, and science should be challenged and delegate their leading thinkers and practitioners. on developing the long-term strategy. You could be a little bit cynical. You could say that in this COVID-19 period, that this time is the time to be slow. And we're making use of COVID-19 to read and to write our papers and to re-edit our books and to meet people online more slowly than in other hectic periods. But now there is some haste, there is a sense of urgency. Bearing in mind that the right to education is to be considered one of the most important among fundamental rights and freedoms. It comes the second most fundamental right, after the right to life. And it's relevant to repeat this again, right to life and the right to education. For many reasons, also legal reasons, but education is determining the future of each citizen and of the whole country. Thanks so much for the audience to keep that in mind.
Great, Professor. We know that you could speak all the morning.
Unfortunately.
We are our students. Thank you very much, Professor de Groove, for the excellent lecture. Now I give the floor to Professor Saulo Casali for his brief considerations. Professor Saulo.
Thank you, Carlos. It's wonderful to hear you, Professor de Groove, and your ideas. You showed us that the pandemic showed at the first moment the inequality, the gap of equality between countries, between private and public sectors. Here in Brazil, students from public schools, medium schools, ground schools are at home doing nothing because the digitalization didn't, they don't have the level of digitalization to be included. It's a question of inclusion. And this gap, was very, very strong against some populations. You showed us 43% of people don't have access to internet. And how to build the long-term strategy with in a hybrid sense, with diversification, creativity, transparency, without digitalization. We need to correct it as soon as possible if you want to see a new level of education, a future of education arriving for some populations in the world. And the pandemic showed us, as you said to us, that the digitalization is necessary. We have to create more ambiances of education. We need that to advance the development, to increase the development of the education of the population. And it would be good the pandemic could bring to us the perception more accurate over this kind of problem, and show us that we need to change for some direction now. We need to do something to correct it as soon as possible. Professor de Groove, thank you. Thank you very much for your participation. You are a close friend of the Federal University of Bahia, a close friend of us, and we hope that you could stay with us next year. We are waiting your visit here. Thank you very much. And I would like, Carlos, to say a word to Neantro from the University of Brasilia, member of the World Academy of Art and Science. He is present. looking at our conference. Vasuji and Vani Sental, also from India, members of the World Academy of Science, are present now in our meeting. And let's go ahead. Your floor.
Professor Negruf, merci beaucoup. Bon voyage, bon travail. You know that you have to leave us.
Merci à vous. I will still stay a couple of minutes, but then I have indeed to go to the doctoral class. Yeah.
Okay, Professor. Yeah. So, continue the event. Let me now hand over to the second speaker of the day, Professor Gary Jacobs. He's an American writer, social thinker, researcher, and consultant on the topics of business management, economic and social development, and global governance. He's the president and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science. Professor Gary Jacobs will address about education for global leadership. Professor Gary Jacobs, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our event. Good morning, welcome. The sound.
Thank you.
Now.
Thank you, Professor Ratas, and good morning to all of you. And it's evening time here. I'm speaking from 3 continents away in South India. And it's great to be wonderful to see my close colleagues and friends, Heitor and Saulo, our former president of the World Academy, who we reluctantly allowed to retire, more at the insistence of his wife Lillian than on his, but we couldn't turn her down. But wonderful to be here. And for this topic as well. I enjoyed very much Professor de Groof's presentation looking at education in these very difficult times. I'd like to approach the subject from what I consider a complementary perspective. And in order to do that, it would be helpful if I trace back the work that we have been doing in the World Academy for the last decade. So you'll see where I'm coming from to education from there. In 2013, after Heitor became the president, we were invited by the United Nations in Geneva to collaborate on a conference on the theme, the need for a new paradigm. And the premise behind our proposal and their acceptance was that at a fundamental level, we need fundamental changes in the world system. We're simply not grappling with the challenges that we have. And that is at multiple levels. Our policies are not only inadequate, but wrongly directed in many cases. Our institutions are wrongly organized, inadequately and wrongly organized in order to address these issues. And that, by the way, included educational institutions. The theory on which we are running our social organizations is inadequate and in often cases needs to be challenged. And the thinking processes that we're perpetuating through our educational system are inadequate to address the complexities of the world in which we live. Now, those are broad generalizations, and I'm not going to seek to address them, except to show you where I'm coming from in the observations that we're making. We discussed virtually all areas of human well-being and security at that conference. And one of them, very important one to us, was education. And we asked a question then, that if you wanted to create a global system of education that would make possible affordable, accessible, world-class education for everybody, how would you do it? And there was a dead silence in the room. And 6 months later, we founded a new organization called the World University Consortium with Heitor, who is still the president. And we started a series of international conferences in fact, one of them just a year and a half ago in Rio, with under Hater's organization, at UC Berkeley, my alma mater, in Rome, most recently in Belgrade. And we engaged with educators at all levels, national, global, and institutional. And we pretty much have agreed that however you would do it, you wouldn't do it the way we're doing it now. You would not do it the way we're doing it now. We simply do not have the institutional approach necessary to grapple with the seriousness of the challenges facing humanity when we are evolving so quickly, when things are changing so quickly, not just technologically, but economically and socially, when we're globalizing so quickly, when our values are changing so quickly. We simply don't have the adequate approach to grapple with them. And this was before the pandemic, of course. This was before we were met with an extraordinary challenge, an unprecedented urgency, and I agree with Professor de Groot very much, also a unique opportunity. But the question is, are we going to rise to that opportunity? And when we look back on the responses that we've had to past opportunities, like the end of the Cold War in 1990, like the 2008 financial crisis, which if ever we needed an incentive for changing our financial and economic system and challenging the conventional wisdom on which our orthodoxies are based, we had all the evidence that a fundamental change is necessary. I'm American, and so my own country can take large responsibility for rapidly restoring the status quo and trying to go along in the same direction until we're more vulnerable today than we were 12 years earlier. And economically, we are set back, well, in terms of unemployment, we're set back almost to the level of the 1930s. So I would like to build on what Professor de Groot said. I'm an optimist, and I am not an enthusiast. I have the deepest respect and commitment for the importance of education, because I think it's fair to say that all that has made humanity has taken us out of the forest and built the civilization and culture on which we live is due to this remarkable invention, this remarkable institution in which we are the only species that takes all the learning of the past and systematizes it, organizes it, and tries to pass it on to the future. And that's why each generation can take off from the experience of the previous and go further. We learn, we progress, we go further. But as Professor de Groot also said, this is a conservative institution. In fact, one of the most conservative institutions of those we have. And that made sense hundreds of years ago when the pace of social change was so slow and there was so little that we knew, that trying to conserve knowledge and learn more about the past made eminently good sense. And now we know much more about the past, even of the life 500 years ago than the people did 500 years ago when they were there. We know more about the world in its ancient history and in all its progression up until now. But when it comes to the future, when we think about projecting the educational system we need for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, do we have any idea what that future is that we're trying to project, to create a system for? I think we're grossly unprepared for that. And not only do I feel that education is our most important gift, it's the most important gift of society to humanity, I think it's also part of the problem today. And unless we recognize the need for radical change, it's a strong word, but I don't want to underestimate, unless we recognize the need for really a radical introspection, not only about the pedagogy, not only about the delivery systems, which are very important, and we've been working on it for the last 8 years, but the very content. And as a social scientist, I am particularly focused on the content in the social sciences, and so is the World Academy, though we have many natural scientists, eminent natural scientists working with us. But the idea of dividing the world into segments, into compartments, isolated airtight compartments of reality, and trying to deal with them as if they exist independently of another is patently dangerous when it comes to society. And we have an economic system founded on an orthodoxy that says politics is separate from economics, which is a bold-faced lie, actually, because it's economics that's driving the political system now in all over the world, or that politics or economics can be separated from the ecology of the planet, which we will say until we're going underwater. I mean, the pandemic is the most urgent of the challenges we face, but it's not the most important. It will pass. And whatever the fatalities are, they will be minuscule in comparison what the risks to human security that we face, unless we not only change the institutions, but we change our thinking and the premises on which they're based. And I'm saying this because I think this is, I agree with Professor, this is a unique opportunity. This is a unique moment. But we can't afford to make the mistake of 1990 or even 2008 and think by incremental changes, by learning how to do online education or even hybrid systems, which we are doing, and in India is catching on. We run a school here and all, that we're going to, that's going to be enough. We have to raise a generation with a knowledge that we don't have. It's not, we can't be oriented towards teaching about the past anymore. We have to be learning about how society's changing. We have to be understanding the process of social evolution and conscious social transformation. That's what we need to be studying. We need to be preparing our children, our youth, for a pace of change and a complexity of life far beyond the way our knowledge or our thinking is organized today. And we are working within the World Academy on, right now, this next week actually, and I'm mentioning this as an invitation more than an information, we're conducting another conference now with the United Nations in Geneva next week, a 5-day e-conference with about 40 sessions and about 200 speakers on the issue that I've just outlined here. How do we create, we have a leadership vacuum at the place where we need it most today. Well, at all levels we have it, but at the global level. At a time when we need global cooperation, we need multilateralism, we need new thinking most, we have a big vacuum. How are we going to fill that vacuum? We have a vacuum not only of knowledge, and we have a vacuum of trust. At a time when we need to come together, trust is dissolving, is undermined. Trust in the economy, trust in the government, trust in the media, trust even in our educational institutions is going down. So I'm saying this not in any way to criticize anybody. That's not we are part of this problem, as well as, I'm saying it to say we think we need something much more dramatic than the kind of change that's going on. We need to be thinking post-pandemic, not just how are we going to manage with online education or how are we going to manage with the huge unemployment that has suddenly come. We need to think beyond that, because by the time we get over the pandemic, the global warming issue is going to is not going anywhere. It's not disappearing because of this. We need to be thinking much more about the future than the past, and about new patterns and new approaches. And that's why we're working on new education, new concept. What should we be teaching the future? What should we be learning, teaching ourselves about the process of global social transformation? How do we bring it about? How do we accelerate positive change and overcome the vested interests, the resistances, the entrenched forces, or just the inertia and ignorance of society? And I think if the educational institutions are not going to do this, who is? Who is going to do this? If we're not going to have the courage to ask the questions and challenge ourselves, then who's going to challenge the world? We know in the past we can go on repeating the past for a long time. We've hit a lot of history of the repetition. So I'd like to just sum up in the few seconds I have left that I think we need to relook at our social system from the point of view of values, human values, human welfare, well-being, human security, and ask ourselves, how far are our institutions really serving these fundamental values? And that has everything to do with law, because values are the high ideals for which we yearn. Institutions are the mechanisms through which we try to direct them, but laws are finally the mechanism through which we take the public conscience and translate it into, give it a form where we agree to live by these principles. So in a short period of time, I thank you for this opportunity and a very timely conference. And my one regret is that I missed the 12 previous or 10 previous seminars because they're on such interesting topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We are very happy. Thank you. And I give the floor to Professor Saulo Casale for his brief considerations. Professor Saulo.
Professor Gary, thank you to accept our invitation. When Hattis told me that he needs someone to participate, nomination to participate in our seminar, I remember immediately of you, because you are a thinker, a social scientist, and dedicated to think about global leadership, global education, global educational innovations, as chairman of the World University Consortium, as full member of the Club of Rome, and president of the World Academy of Art and Science. This project you mentioned about global leadership with the United Nations will bring in this year now some results, and it's a joint group of scientists, of thinkers, of artists, of the whole world that are working together to create some new perspectives, working with new paradigms about education. The World Academy of Art and Science, I have to say, it's an organization founded 1960 by Einstein, Oppenheimer, and Bertrand Russell, and others, with the idea to develop the mankind, the ideas that can help the development of the mankind. And we, at the World Academy, promoted a conference, international conference about education. The first one was in Rome, Italy. The second one in Rio de Janeiro, 2 years ago. And last year in Belgrade, Serbia. And these conferences join hundreds of people interested in the future of education. And the next one, there will be more one. I don't know exactly where. Until now, the pandemic created a great disturb of all the planning. But it's the lessons and the ideas that the Global Leadership Project and the conference, the reason of what we discussed in this international conference about the future of education were expressed by Gary and Professor Gary Jacobs. We are very proud to receive you now and to open this space for the Brazilian world about your ideas. Thank you, Professor Gary. We hope you can send to us the article to publish in our third book. And thank you very much to accept it from India and to here.
Thank you, Saulo. And if I could just add that I did mean this as an invitation. Anyone who would be interested in participating in the conference, we have actually 6 of the 40 sessions are specifically on education, on the different dimensions of it, because we think it's so essential. If you just give me your emails in the chat window or something, we'll be happy to send you information, and we'd love for you to join us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the people that are interested can write to me or to Ratis, and we will send it to Professor Gary.
Amazing.
And let's go ahead, please,
Okay,
Carlos.
I think Professor Jan de Groef wants to talk.
No, I just confirm that we are highly committed to what was being said by colleague Jerry Jacobs. So we are welcoming his leadership and the leadership of the academy, and we will try to participate in this Geneva conferences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Gail Jacobs, for the excellent lecture again. Continue the event. Now I pass the floor to the first speaker of the day, Professor Antônio Pedro Barbas Homem. He is professor at the University of Lisbon and rector of the European University to talk about the topic, Challenge for Higher Education in a Post-Pandemic Era. I have a deep admiration for Professor Barbas Homem. He was my advisor in the master's and PhD. He is an inspiration for all his students. Professor Barbas Homem has 4 daughters, and I have 2. I tried to convince my wife to have 2 more daughters to follow my master example, but she doesn't accept it. I tried. Professor Barbas Homem, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, and to all of you. I'm very happy to be here. Unfortunately, I would be even happier if I was in Bahia. Just a couple of months ago, I was there for the event with the Faculty of Law of the University and the Congress of Lawyers of Brazil. And we had a wonderful time and wonderful discussions on the future of education of lawyers and the future of the rule of law. And now we are confronted with this inevitability of speaking online. If I can be frank, I am really tired of looking at my computer. I think probably we are all tired of looking at computers, and computers do not replace people. And I think it's one of the big conclusions of this, the first big conclusion of this pandemic situation, is that we all miss our good friends from Bahia, Recife, Salvador, and of course, Antwerp and many other places in the world. Yes, distant learning will not replace schools, will not replace universities. So I would just like to highlight some few points in my brief presentation and speak about how these major changes that we have, and I speak about 5 major changes in the last decades, are now threatened by pandemia, but mainly also of many plans post-pandemia that we are now facing. The first big change, and Jan, of course, has books on this, is the democratization of access to higher education. It was a big achievement throughout the world, this huge movement of new people entering university. And in many countries like Portugal, the figures show from dictatorship to democracy, 10 times more people enter university. And in this democratization...
No.
Sorry? Yeah. Thank you, Vani. But in this democratization of accessing higher education, education become a fundamental human right, and also access to university become also a fundamental human right. But to fulfill this demand, higher education landscape changed dramatically. New kind of institutions, new kind of programs, adult learning, long life learning, distance learning. But in the last years, well, the last 20 years, we see industrial society move to post-industrial. Sociologists have different names: affluent, postmodern, risk society, network society, global. So the global agenda for this movement is also changed. And one of the big claims, of course, is equality. Equality in exceeding education, also as a basic human right, but also equality in the right to succeed in education. And Jan also spoke about some of the programs that try internationally to measure the outcome of education, such as PISA and other programs. How equal are we in the global level, but also at the national level, in giving our students access to quality education? And this is, of course, another subject. Carlos is written on that aspect. Well, the question is there not only a right to education, but a right to a quality education? And quality in different contexts can mean many different things. If we understand this idea of capabilities, we understand that the process of education is not just about teaching and learning, it's about many other things. And we can, for instance, if you look at the UN Human Development Program Index, we can see this very complex achievements that include not only right to school, right to teacher, but also right to handbooks and many other fundamental rights. And this, I think, very important humanist and liberal approach studied by many philosophers is, of course, something that has to be balanced with other fundamental things. One of them is autonomy. And of course, when we speak about universities and all other kind of different higher education institutions, autonomy, of course, is an important value. And many constitutions, such as the Brazilian or the Portuguese, even declare it. The autonomy of the university is also a fundamental right of an institution. And we have seen this idea of autonomy evolving in the last couple of decades from a fundamental right, and I will be, of course, I say something controversial, to a more instrumental right. We see in many countries, mea culpa, I wrote also some of these I drafted some of the laws on quality control and creating regulatory agencies, but we have seen the focus coming from autonomy of institutions to regulation, quality control, and evaluation of universities. And the new generation of state administration mechanisms, and a difficult balance, a difficult dialogue between universities and these regulatory organs. And I think it's universal at this point of pandemic where all institutions have to close, we all at the university level, we are a little bit eager for new directives from the ministry, from the regulator, in order to understand what kind of things we can do in this online new status of the universities. Because the burden of regulation is so high today in our institutions that in many of our universities, we all fear that many of the measures that we take can be understood as illegal, not authorized, or in any way not coping with international or national directives regarding programs or regarding even institutions. And so this balance between autonomy, what we can do, and what we understand that we should do as an autonomous institution, of course, is in this situation of pandemic even more stressful. And I speak also as a rector, always trying to understand where I can go, because in the end, of course, the university is not only autonomous, but it's also responsible and liable. And liable, of course, first of all, to its own students. And so I think this is one of the, of course, urgent matters, but in the end, it will be also a problem for the future. So this new balance, this new dialogue that we must have between the university, the autonomous of the university, and the regulator. Also, a new trend that we are already facing is the trend of digitalization. And we all know that digitalization is a process that is changing economy and society. In Portugal, some of our big corporations, in fact, the Association of Industrialists has made a major study emphasizing that more than 1,200,000 jobs will be affected by digitalization. So that means almost 20% of the jobs in Portugal, the actual labor force in Portugal, would be affected by digitalization. And when trying to understand how could universities prepare students for these new challenges coming from digitalization, we found many times ourselves shocking to a barrier because of these regulatory reasons. Well, universities have to be innovative, and many times we could not be innovative because regulation was forcing us to be more and more uniform and not more and more diverse. And that's a new situation that became more evident when all of a sudden in Portugal in 11th of March, we had to close all universities. And so forcing us, well, of course, it was not, unfortunately, not only universities had to close, well, all schools and many other courts had to close. And we are, in fact, able to measure what kind of digitalization we had inside our own institutions and how we were prepared to deal with this emergency situation. And as previous speakers have expressed, we found a very different landscape. From private to public universities, inside public universities, many faculties were prepared and others were not prepared to the challenge that this pandemic brought to us. And of course, we are now asking all ourselves if this tendency to digitalization is coming to be the new trend in higher education. For me, of course, maybe also a question of generation, I hope not. I hope that we can combine hybrid models. We can take all the best of technology, but we cannot replace the humanist and liberal values that created universities from medieval times to our times. And I will be, frankly, and of course in our events we can be can say something controversial. I will not agree with Gary on the way that we should be radical. Radical change sometimes brings effective radical change. You claim for a wizard, and there will be the wizard that you don't want. Well, maybe radical change that you cannot cope, that we cannot control, and you will not agree. Why? Some just reflections, and I have 3 minutes left. Some reflections. One of the trends that we also find in this digitalization process is that we are weakening some of the things that in the past were, in fact, strong, and one of the strongest aspects of the university and higher education life in Europe or in the United States, in many Western countries. I speak about copyrights, industrial rights, and intellectual property. And we see now all this tendency that we see in other aspects of life, like in the movie area, the artistic area, and so on. So it's not just about copyrights of professors and other intellectuals that we are speaking. We see now a major tendency to online sources, something that is good, open sciences, but something that is quite opposite of a good thing. Well, not protecting the creator, not protecting the intellectual that is producing new innovative ideas. We have been seeing that as a major tendency worldwide. Well, the United States were surpassed by China as the big creator of patents, well, industrial patents. So, and this tendency is also affecting some of the biggest European universities that were in the front line of innovation, innovation for the industry, innovation for the society. And it's a task of the university to be on the front line of innovation, but also in the front line of these ideas that are protected by copyrights. And if we see this tendency of, if you understand this movement of digitalization as a sort of imperium from the big companies that control the globalization process, in the end, the autonomy of the university, the right to be different, will be affected. And this is one of my concerns as an intellectual. If we see this globalization process as a kind of motto, we all have to think the same at the same time, then the task of the university to be controversial, to be critical, to think, and the right that we have to say to our students, you have the right to think by using your own head. Well, this is a very Portuguese expression. Then this process can be really a risk to our democratic and pluralistic societies. And I think this combination of digitalization, globalization, and the use universally the same kind of materials is a big threat to our Western invention of universities with autonomy, critical thinking, and the capacity to innovate. And so I think this is a really a big challenge. And so valuing ideas, invention, and intellectual creation is in fact one of the tasks of the university, so that we cannot create inside the university a kind of Orwell dystopia when a Ministry of Truth establishes the vocabulary and admissible ideas. And so let me just conclude with these ideas. Emergency distance learning does not replace schools, does not replace universities, does not replace ourselves as professors at the university level. And we should also prepare ourselves that in the post-pandemic world and post-pandemic era, we can return to our universities, to our schoolrooms, teach to our students, of course, learning that we can use better technology, but not be mastered by technology. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Professor Barbazomi. Unfortunately, we have only a few minutes to hear you. I give the floor to Professor Saulo Casale for his brief considerations. Professor Saulo.
Hey, congratulations, Professor Barbazomi, from this beautiful city, Lisbon, in Portugal. And let me tell to the public, to the audience, that the link for the conference between United Nations and World Academy of Art and Science was indicated in the chat. Please consult the chat, copy the link, and the record it is the link for the conference that Professor Gary mentioned before. And Professor Barbazomi, thank you very much. Your ideas are more or less in the same line that we hear from Professor Gary and Professor de Groef. And it's very interesting to listen now about liberal values, critical thinking, and innovation in the higher education sector, when in Brazil we are experiencing a great intervention at the universities, public universities, the autonomy of the universities in Brazil. The current government is more and more trying to abolish some rules, some norms that we followed until now, given autonomy, and we are losing some level of autonomy nowadays. Today was published a regulation about nominations of rectors by the president. No more from the university, the nominations, the names, 3 names that could be chosen by the president. The process is changing. Now here in Brazil, we are experiencing some risks to the autonomy nowadays. And you told to us another truth, that was we are not prepared for the digitalization effects. The digitalization needs, all the universities are not prepared. We are not prepared. The higher education system was not prepared. And we can, after it, see the difference, the gap between public and private institutions. Our Federal University of Bahia decided to stop with the classes, stop with the activities, close the doors, because the level of access to the internet was very low between our students, and there will be a risk of exclusion if you continue to offer the educational service. So it's the reality that we experience in Brazil nowadays. And thank you, Professor Barbazomi. Your ideas were very, very useful to us. And Professor Hatches, the floor is yours again.
Professor Barbazomi, a big hug to Fatima, to Maria. Hat's family embraces you. Continue the event. I would like now to turn over to the 4th speaker of the day, Professor Heitor Gorgolino de Souza. Professor Heitor Gorgolino de Souza is one of the most important Brazilian personalities in the international political scene as rector of the University of the United Nations. He is a former president of the World Academy of Arts and Science. Professor Heitor Gugolino de Souza will speak on the theme Education and COVID-19. Professor Gugolino, Heitor Gugolino, good day. Welcome to our event.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank all of you who invited me to come to this webinar, which is a good idea. By the way, we are using a means of improving communication so that we can talk from our house. I'm right now sitting in my office, and I have to thank also Saulo and his colleagues who have organized this team for the discussion. I enjoyed very much the idea. I started listening to the group telling a picture from Europe, and particularly from Belgium, but also from global point of view. But also have also listened to the presentations of Gary Jacobs, Pedro Barbazon, and so far we have learned new things. But as we just heard from Saulo a few moments ago, some things are happening in Brazil in connection to education, and particularly in higher education. But I wanted to speak my presentation, since we have only 15 minutes, 3 points: education and research, distance learning, what we're doing in a way here, and third point, future education. This is based on my own experience of professional life. I've been a teacher for the last 70 years of my life in different places in my own country, in my own city, and then in Tokyo, Japan, for the world, to the United Nations University. Frankly speaking, it's a major priority for our country, education and research. Education, because we still have to realize that we have 220 million inhabitants in Brazil, and unfortunately, over 10% of this population is illiterate. That means it's a major challenge for us to overcome this problem, and this means we have to give priority to education at all levels, at state, city level, state level, federal level. So in spite of all the good talk that we hear from politicians about education, unless we give real priority by providing more resources, by improving the training of teachers. We need to train more teachers and better teachers. So this is a major challenge for our country. So I would say education, research. Why research? Because we have to keep studying. Gary just mentioned from the past, we have hundreds of thousands of years, I would say, but we still have a lot to learn. That means we have to do research, and research in each reality of each country. It's one thing to have a good research in the United States, in University of California, Los Angeles, or University of New York, or University of Chicago, in the UK, Oxford, and in France, Université de Paris, etc. But we have to do research in our own country. And unfortunately, especially at this particular moment, the government is not providing enough support for research. As a matter of fact, the monies have been decreasing instead of increasing as they should be. Anyway, this is a major point, maybe a particular point of Brazil, because we have to teach the politicians to realize the importance of research, the importance of education, and provide support to make this a major issue for our country. Second thing I want to mention is that distance education, which we are discussing now, distance learning, and not only to distance education, but to hybrid education, combining distance and presential, which is an important element. Let's face it, Brazil has today 8 million students in higher education enrollment. But you may not know, and many people do not know, that this year, there's 1.4 million students studying through distance education in Brazil. Because of the pandemic, the difficulties, most universities have closed. My former alma mater, which is the University of San Carlos, which I founded as rector in 1970. I was there 2 weeks ago, and the rector told me we are going to close the university because of the pandemic. This university, which I started in 1970 in the city of San Carlos in São Paulo, Brazil, consider distance education a priority, and it's growing. I started with 100 students in that day. I was there 2 weeks ago after 50 years of opening the Federal University of San Carlos, and the new rector told me we have 27,000 students. It's a public university. Students don't pay any cent for their studies, but anyway, the university has grown, has new research centers, has a good program for master's education, special education, doctor's education. But it's only one university out of the 199 that we have in Brazil, but it's considered to be between the 15 best universities in the country. So I'm very happy and very proud of being the first rector of that university. But again, talking about distance learning. Distance learning is not only in Brazil, it's a global issue. It's an issue in Latin America. 20 years ago, we created an organization called Virtual Educa. As a matter of fact, it has been very active all the way from Mexico to Argentina, and even one in Brazil. We had a conference in 2008 in São José dos Campos at Univap, and we had 2,500 participants. That means we began to grow, and I think we're still growing, but because of the pandemic, this is a wonderful opportunity. But of course, we have to think of what Professor Pedro Barbezon said, and we have to think of the role of the universities, which are beyond the teaching and research and being an important contribution to society. And we need to think of the autonomy, which was mentioned again here. So all these issues are related, and the recent issue that Professor Saulo has just mentioned of a government action in Brasilia regarding university residents is something that we have to be very concerned. But let me go quickly now to the future. Remember, we have to think that the world today, UNESCO is a major international organization, and UNESCO has recently gave some global issues that we have to think of the current education system, how to address these issues. Okay, these issues are briefly, 65 million new teachers are needed to reach our goals for 2030. It's a major issue. Second issue, 758 million adults worldwide still lack any literacy skills. 23 of them are women. 2/3 of them are women. We need more resources. $38 billion are needed in assistance, a 5-fold increase from the current finance goals. Now, only 14% of youth complete secondary education in the low-income countries. Okay, these are big challenges that we have to face. The current university system all over the world. And I remember that when we created in 2013, as Gary has mentioned, the World University Consortium, I have here in your brochure, we have pointed out, given just a number. Global system of higher education needs to grow to accommodate another 95 million students by 2025. That means we have to create 3 new universities every week for the next 10 years. This is a major challenge. We know we cannot do it so far. So what could be the solution? When we created the University of São Carlos in Brazil, we said, we need a new university for a new reality. Because in the days we created this university, we started with a course of materials engineering, which did not exist in the country. So as a result of development in science and technology and research, we created this particular course. Obviously, we didn't have teachers in the country. So we have to bring teachers from outside. We have to import teachers bring know-how, and we did, and finally, this university has been opening, has been already trained more than 1,500 engineers of materials, which is important for the development of the country. Okay, this University of San Carlos commemorated 50 years, and I was the first rector of that university. But we have to think about what should be the requirements now if we look to the future. Okay, in 2013, we organized the World University Consortium by the World Academy of Art and Science, because the founders of the World Academy of Art and Science in 1960 proposed to create a world university. We don't have a world university, but we are moving towards that. Eventually, we will get there. But this world university had to offer courses which are of interest to every country. Of course, in Brazil, I can tell you, we have 200 universities, but we are not producing the professionals that we need in the basic sciences, in the applied science, in the economies, in all areas of specialty today. But we are moving forward, and I believe we are coming to new developments. The University of San Carlos, for instance, had a very interesting experiment. Since the rector, myself, when I was a kid, learned from my teacher to plant a tree in the elementary school in my city, I did that every year. For the next 4 years, I had to go there every day and put water in my tree. Okay, I liked that idea. And when I became rector of San Carlos, I mentioned this to the students of my university. And we decided to organize a program. And to very proud of that, we planted 30,000 trees in our campus. So if you go to San Carlos University today, you find fantastic, what's beautiful trees here. They were planted 50 years ago, okay? That's why you see this fantastic tree. So if we could do that in many universities around the world, even in my own country, we need that because we have a major problem, which was mentioned briefly here, the environmental problem. And each country has to find solutions to this problem. And planting trees is a major, simple solution that we can do that. But let me say to you, when I joined the World Academy of Art and Science, I learned to see what kind of issues the World Academy is thinking. And first, if I look, here is a small picture here of a magazine which I found in Japan when I was at the United Nations University. The United Nations University was created by U Thant, the former Secretary General, thinking of the global problems, the problems that are today at the United Nations. And the United Nations is thinking about the future. You heard Gary mention this important meeting that we will have in October in Geneva, Global Leadership for the 21st Century. That's a major issue, which is first meeting in June now, is preparing for that. But anyway, we have to think of other issues. We decided to think of the future. Okay, you heard before, we had organized meetings in future education in Rome, in Rio de Janeiro, and now in a nice place that we were there in Georgia. Okay, let me see, my friends, we also thought not only of the future education, we have to think of a new economy. We have to think of this new economy because the world will not continue with the same economy after this pandemic is over in a few weeks' time. But I wanted to mention to you that we have done beautiful work on the virtual educa. I mentioned virtual education all over the world. And the main leader that we had for that for the last 30 years, unfortunately, was passed away on the virtual coronavirus crisis in Madrid a few weeks ago. I'm very sorry because we did work a lot to improve the level of distance education, which our friend, Professor Lito, has given us the data for this 1,400,000 students today. Now, but we have to think of the worries of Professor Pedro Barbazon and about the autonomy of the university system. How can the government provide sufficient autonomy so that the researchers of the university can think of innovation, of new challenges for the future? So Very briefly, education major priority, distance education, very needed priority, and fund future. Future means, I don't know if my time is okay, but I think I should close my words here by thanking you again for this opportunity. Let us think on the future. It's not easy. We're going to need a new education in the near future. We hope that we can continue these discussions in largest group and hopefully find better solutions for the future of education all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. We are very happy and honored with your participation with us today. Now, I give the floor to Professor Saulo Casale for his brief considerations. Professor Saulo.
Thank you, Hatches and Professor Heitor. It's wonderful to hear you, to meet you here. And when Hatches asked me to follow someone to stay with us in an educational panel and pandemia, you are the name, you are the guy in the education matter in Brazil. And I would like to say that Professor Gurgulino was all that could be possible to be in the educational system. He was rector of the University of São Carlos. He was advisor of the UNESCO. He was rector of the University of the United Nations. He was chief in the educational field in the Organization of American States. He was president of the National Council of Education. So he was the guy. He was the guy, and he shared with us, and president of the former president of the World Academy of Art and Science, and a member of the World University Consortium, vice president of the Council of Rectors, the Global Council of Rectors. It's the name, and talked with us about the reserves, always with not enough support, distance learning, and share the experience and vision about this, and future of education. He was a prominent speaker, always at the seminars conducted by the World Academy about future of education, and his contributions are always very appreciated. Thank you, Professor Gurgulino. We are very happy to receive you again. And I would like to receive your article to publish in our book. If please send it to us. And thank you. Professor Hatches, let me break the rule because Professor de Groef needs to go out. He has a PhD defense panel, evaluation panel now. He has an academic compromise. And Professor Gary has another one. It's almost night in India now. And we can allow them to say the last words now. Professor Nina will speak, Professor Gurgulino will stay, Professor Barbazoma will stay. They will try to stay more sometime, but we can allow them to say the last words. Professor de Groef and Professor Gary. Professor de Groef first. Professor de Groef?
I think he...
the thesis
left.
Panel was advised to us the necessity to go out to do that. Professor Gary, so please.
Well, thank you, Saulo, and great to listen to you, Heitor. And I apologize for leaving. I was hoping to hear all of the speakers. I scheduled the 2 hours, and we're going to go late tonight because we're planning for this conference next week, and we're running out of time. I just wanted to say this is such a fascinating discussion and too frustrating to try to do it in a few minutes. But I'd just like to comment on one thing that Professor Barbazoma mentioned, because I don't think we differ on that actually. The one thing we're concerned about in education is that we are focusing too much on standardization and conformity and not enough on individuality. We need more and more variation from the mass production system we have and the mass thinking processes we have to really encourage out-of-the-box thinking and innovation and not this conformity. And that's exactly what we've been promoting. And we have a special session on it at the conference next week. And we have a project on how do we create more individual thinking rather than this rote indoctrination and all. And I just end with one anecdote to show you how serious it is. A few years ago, I attended a conference in Europe in which we had 3 leading economists from the United States. They were from Yale, well-known economists. And I happened to be traveling with one of them. And I asked him, I said, how do you, in Europe, where we do a lot of work, we know there's a serious concern among the economic students that they're all being taught the same thing, and they're not being taught the diversity and of heterogeneous theory that's out there. There are about 95 theories in economics, and they're all being taught the same thing. I said, what's happening? And there's a protest among the students that we're all being indoctrinated with the philosophy of a particular school and not exposed to what's going on elsewhere. And he shocked me beyond measure because he said, we don't have that problem in the United States. We all teach the same thing. Now that's really frightening. I think exactly for this reason, we need to be, I found more freedom of thought and heterogeneity in economics at the conference during my first visit to Brasilia, which was 2014, right? For the economics conference there, than I find in North America. So I absolutely agree with you, Professor. And I don't think globalization needs to mean more conformity. It may mean that there is an effort at global corporate standardization, but living on the other side of the world from where I grew up, I think the capacity for diversity of thinking is much greater in a world where we hear many different viewpoints and they're each assimilated in a different way. So certainly, whether we get the conformity and the utopian dystopia, or we get the individuality is going to depend on the kind of education we have. Are we teaching the truth in education, or are we teaching people to think for themselves? Thank you. Pleasure being with you. And I will stay on until my other meeting starts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gabe Jacobs, for the considerations. Continue the event. Now I would like to turn over to the 5th and last lecturer of the day, our dearest Professor Nina Ranieri, Nina Beatriz Stocco Ranieri. I had the honor of being a student of Professor Nina Ranieri in the Faculty of Law at the University of São Paulo. She is really a great inspiration to all her students. Nina Beatriz Stocco Ranieri is an associate professor in the Department of State Law, Faculty of Law, University of São Paulo. She is coordinator of the UNESCO Chair in the Rights to Education at the USP Faculty of Law, largest reference in Brazil on the right to education, author of several works on the right to education. Dear Professor Nina, welcome, good day.
Thank you, Carlos, for the invitation. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here with these distinguished colleagues and audience. Thank you very much. And being the last one to speak, it's hard to point out some different things from my colleagues. I think that the crisis, the COVID pandemic crisis brought us numerous challenges, and they are the same all over the world. The difference is the intensity. And I think that in Brazil especially, the combination of the pandemic crisis with economic and political crisis make all these problems increase. And I have to say that I'm really concerned about all the three crises, the health crisis, the economical crisis, the political crisis, and all of them will impact in a very bad way education. I know that education systems were not built to deal with extended shutdowns like those imposed by the pandemics. And I also know that in Brazil, as in everywhere, teachers, administrators, and parents have worked hard to keep learning alive through remote learning. And nevertheless, these efforts are not likely to provide the quality of education that is delivered in the classroom. Besides, it will not be a return from where we have stopped. And this is our major challenge. First of all, distance learning involves the central challenge of inclusion. Professor De Groot has already talked about this, and even in a situation of availability, the existence of devices does not mean their adequacy. And he also talked about this. As you may know, in Brazil, there are at least, or let me rephrase, only 21% of students aged 5 to 17 in the public school do not have access to internet. But anyway, adequacy of these devices is not the same everywhere in Brazil. The other big problem is learning losses and dropouts, which causes disproportionate learning losses for the students, compounding existing gaps, but also lead to more of them to drop out. And this could have long-term effects on the student preparation for the job market and on their long-term economic well-being, and not to mention on the global economy as a whole. Even more troubling is the social and economic context, the increase and the persistent achievement disparities across income levels and between the different regions of the country. Another relevant question in Brazil is food deficits for millions of children and youngsters, not to mention inadequate access to health and mental care, and problems with housing instability, among others. Dr. De Groot already talked about this, but it's really a problem we have to face now. In Brazil, school attendance has been suspended since March 16 average, and they will remain closed until August at least. I have also to mention fiscal losses and education financing that are being impacted by the pandemic. The pandemic affected drastically tax revenues in all Brazilian states. The states concentrate 80% of enrollments in basic public education. At the same time, expenditures on emergency measures to replace in-person classes has skyrocketed, such as the preparation of virtual classes and the delivery of printed material to families. It is estimated that the results of the drop in revenue and the increase in expenses will cause a loss of 30 billion reais, or $6 billion all over the country. To avoid this critical scenario that would impact millions of children and young people who depend on public education, it is necessary federal financing support optimizing the use of resources in education departments all over the country, and the approval of the new Fundeb, which is our national system of financing basic education. It's a national fund comprising all the enrollments, all children and youngsters enrolled in the basic education. What has already been done to face those challenges? We enacted a law allowing municipalities to purchase school lunches through a special program and to be distributed directly to parents or guardians of students in public elementary school. We already issue an executive order, a medida provisória, establishing rules of exception for the school year, eliminating the fulfillment of the required 200 school calendar days to the end of 2020. Dr. De Groef has already mentioned this measure also. And the National Education Board set recommendations for each school level, noting that the solution depends on how the school year is reorganized and on the preparation of teachers for school return. It is also important, said the National Board of Education, that each school and their students work together in search of the best solutions within legal education norms. Assessment will also be a problem, and it was suggested that national and state assessments consider reorganizing the calendar of each public education system, local system, state system, and federal system, before establishing new schedules for large-scale assessment. In this sense, the evaluation exams for the conclusion of the 2020 school year should take into account the curricular contents effectively offered to students, considering the exceptional context of the pandemic, with the objective to avoid the increasing of learning losses and dropouts. What we notice during these 3 months is that a great effort in the public education systems have been done all over the country. In general, adopting distance learning media such as online classes, virtual platforms, websites, TV and radio classes, study guides, and even WhatsApp to reach students all over the country. The highlights are Maranhão, for instance, a state in the north of the country using TV and radio. Rio Grande do Norte is also an example in the northeast of the country of using TV and radio classes. And the state of Paraná in the south is a highlight in this country situation. However, in many states, these activities may not count as part of the mandatory school class hours, depending on the rate of inclusion of the students. So it will be individual school decisions how to deal with the return to class and how to count as mandatory school class hours. The return to school, the return to in-person classes is already being discussed among education departments. International experiences, health requirements, and expenditures are being analyzed. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Education does not participate planning. This is a characteristic of this Ministry of Education, not to be concerned with the situation of the country. Federal government says that this is a local issue or a state issue, and they don't have any responsibility on planning and helping or help the systems all over the country. The National Board of Education is taking care of this, but they don't have executive powers. They don't have the possibility to interfere in local system. They don't have the possibilities to finance municipalities that don't have conditions to support all this situation. Still, we don't have a consensus on date. The reopening of schools will probably be organized in a hybrid model, as already mentioned here. And there will be probably a mix of distance activities using technology and in-person classes. In-person classes must be on alternate days, and there are also studies for the occupation of schools in shifts, including Saturday. But nothing is already established or fixed. In the law school at the University of São Paulo, we will probably return with in-person classes only in October. No chance to return in August or September due to the large number of students and the impossibility to maintain a regular or a safe distance between students. So in my school, we will continue with distance learning. I tried to list a set of challenges of going back to school. First of all, the emotional impact on students and educational professionals, especially on the university and colleges. The sophomores, the first years, they are so frustrated with the impossibility to be with their mates and teachers and lecturers, etc. The last year students also concluding their courses, they are very frustrated, and not to mention insecurity all over the school. School dropouts, gradual return with health precautions, compliance with the workload required by law. The other challenge is the institutionalization of learning recovery policies, strengthening the family-school relationship, the necessity of frequent communication with parents and guardians, and the use of technology as a continuous ally, and the big challenge of educational investments in a recession scenario, especially in public basic education. In some schools will face challenges that can only be faced with the support of other areas in public basic education, involving especially health and social assistance, and the necessary dialogue between local institutions that influence education policies, such as the collaboration between states and municipalities, considering that we can't count with the federal government. Responses to the current moment may impose positive and lasting changes in the education systems for sure, rebuilt for better or returning with a better and stronger systems. But we have a lot to do. I can also point some legal issues related to the challenges I mentioned. For example, strengthening education federalism, strengthening the participation of the federal government and local government, especially in poor municipalities. The necessity of guarantee quality in education, the necessity of guarantee equity and the approval of the new Fundeb. Eu acredito que o Gary saiu e que nós possamos continuar em português
Ele acabou de sair.
Restam. Mas a aprovação do novo Fundeb é essencial nessa circunstância. E ao invés de nós estarmos discutindo isso, e o Ministério da Educação preocupado com isso, se preocupa com a indicação sem consulta de reitores através de medidas provisórias. E como nós estamos apenas entre nós agora, é preciso dizer que a boiada está passando. Essa medida provisória é apenas mais uma boiada que passa. O Pedro provavelmente não está a par dessa expressão, passar uma boiada, mas isso foi uma menção do ministro do Meio Ambiente durante uma reunião gravada de ministros com o presidente da República, e ele disse que era preciso aproveitar a pandemia para que agora se pudesse fazer tudo o que não dá para fazer quando a mídia está inteiramente concentrada no presidente da República. Como a pandemia atrai a mídia, é o tempo de passar a boiada. Então, eu paro por aqui. Eu acredito que não trouxe novidades para todos, mas apenas para dizer, falando de valores, como foi mencionado pelo Gary, e dizendo de novo, o que nós estamos passando não é diferente do que se passa no mundo, mas a intensidade pode ser muito maior, especialmente no momento onde os valores democráticos estão deixando de lado e nós estamos sendo atropelados por todas essas boiadas, além do descaso permanente do Ministério da Educação em relação à qualidade e equidade na oferta da educação durante a pandemia, o que nos faz involuir e nos deixa muito para trás em comparação a outras nações. Muito obrigada mais uma vez.
Excelente, professora. I will get up to applaud. Professor, passar então a palavra para o senhor, para as suas considerações, e realmente é marcante esse ministério da ausência de educação, né, da falta de educação que nós estamos ultrapassando no nosso país neste período, né? Como o senhor colocou até anteriormente, hoje nós fomos brindados por uma medida provisória incompatível com qualquer perspectiva de autonomia universitária, né, que com certeza vai ser objeto de muita discussão, né, judicial o mais rápido possível. Professor Saulo Casale, com a palavra.
Professora Nina, parabéns pela exposição que resume praticamente todos os aspectos da pandemia, quer dizer, dos impactos da pandemia na área educacional. Foi um quadro, eu ia dizer framework, um quadro bastante completo, bastante compreensivo, né, em todos os aspectos de perdas fiscais, novos calendários, os efeitos sobre classes presenciais, exames, o ensino à distância, os desafios do retorno à escola. E essa situação, nós sabemos, a USP, ela tem, por ser uma universidade estadual, ela depende basicamente do orçamento estadual paulista. E é uma realidade toda própria quando o Estado de São Paulo acusa, né, a baixa do orçamentária fiscal, né? E nós vemos, inclusive, uma das perguntas que lhe foi dirigida foi sobre o cenário profissional da educação depois da pandemia. Eu vou pedir que responda assim que eu dirigir aos outros dois palestrantes a outra pergunta que chegou. Mas, professora Nina, ficamos honrados com a sua presença aqui hoje. Não pense que não trouxe ideias novas, não. Trouxe um esclarecimento, uma visão que contribuiu muito para o tema hoje debatido. Nós aguardamos o envio do artigo, né, para incluirmos no livro. Assim, aí a perguntante, que foi Raquel, diz assim, não, ela pergunta sobre educação profissional. educação profissional.
A pergunta é para mim, Saulo?
Sobre educação profissional, mas eu posso já lhe dar a palavra e ouvir o professor Heitor e o professor Barbas Homem sobre a outra pergunta, que eu já adianto qual foi. Foi de Ézio, que pergunta com o aprofundamento das diferenças entre a educação pública e a educação privada, se seria necessário criar um sistema de modalidade de cotas para balancear a equação. E essas são as perguntas que chegaram para nós. Então, eu vou pedir, professora Nina, que responda a essa sobre a educação profissional e que os professor Heitor e o professor Barbazome respondam sobre a questão da diferença entre públicas e privadas, que solução podia ter, adoção de sistema de cotas. E eu também estendo essa pergunta sobre a educação profissional ao próprio professor Heitor e ao próprio professor Barbazomos, que podem também cogitar dela. Então, ficam essas questões para os três e nós ouviremos, então, cada um sobre elas. Começamos por quem, professor Hatz?
Eu acho que a gente pode, na verdade, até por causa do tempo, né? Porque nós temos um teto, né? Estabelecer essa pergunta que é mais platafórmica, né, para a gente. Qual é a opinião de cada palestrante, nas suas considerações finais, sobre a educação como um todo no período pós-pandemia, né? Seria mais...
certo, se quiserem entrar nessas questões específicas, ok. Então, vamos lá, vamos ouvir cada um, serão também as considerações finais, e aí
horário, isso.
Nós encerraremos, então vamos lá.
Vamos começar pelo professor, estava na ordem, né? Professor Barbazomem, né? Seguindo a ordem que a gente estabeleceu.
Bom, português de Portugal, não é? Sou aqui uma minoria terrível, não é?
Mas consegue entender o nosso idioma, né?
Exatamente.
Ô Pedro, mas hoje você não tem que aprovar nem desaprovar ninguém.
Nada. Posso só contar, isso é uma piada, não é? Interna, e que é muito divertida, não é? Podia não ter sido, mas acabou sendo muito divertida, mas fazendo online, à distância, a arguição de um candidato de doutoramento na Universidade de São Paulo, e depois de uma longuíssima sessão, enfim, todos em São Francisco e eu à distância em Lisboa, em minha casa, eu lá disse no português de Portugal, que é come sílabas, os portugueses comem as sílabas, lá disse aprovado. E do outro lado percebi o pânico, o pânico da Nina, porque perceberam reprovado. Portanto, nós comemos aqui a sílaba, não é o aprovado, é aprovado. E, na verdade, o candidato, que era um excelente candidato, uma excelente tese, uma excelente prova, acabava quase reprovado por uma questão de distância. Portanto, a distância divide-nos o sotaque também. Mas os problemas, não. E muitos dos problemas que foram aqui enunciados, na verdade, são comuns hoje a muitos países no mundo. As instituições preparadas, e que já tinham feito um grande investimento em tecnologia, conseguiram, na verdade, prestar aos seus estudantes um serviço de qualidade. Não sei se isso está a acontecer também no Brasil, calculo que sim, que é muito mais litigioso que Portugal, mas mesmo no ensino privado há hoje muitas demandas, porque o ensino não está a corresponder àquilo que foi contratado. Embora globalmente as escolas privadas estejam melhor que grande parte do ensino público, na verdade há muitas diferenças dentro do próprio ensino privado. Por exemplo, muitas escolas privadas que estão a assegurar, e falo também de Portugal, um ensino que corresponde à totalidade das classes, e outros que têm apenas aulas esporádicas durante o dia e outras atividades de ligação com os estudantes. No ensino público, isso também está a acontecer em Portugal, e falo do ensino não superior. Portanto, escolas do ensino, nós chamamos básico e secundário, portanto, depois no caso do secundário correspondente ao ensino médio brasileiro, onde há sobretudo nos grandes liceus de Lisboa, as grandes escolas de Lisboa, que estão a assegurar praticamente um ensino global aos seus estudantes, mas no resto do país, não. Em alguns casos, não há ensino de todo, não há nada. Para o ensino básico, e aqui recordo também o que disse a Nina, o governo criou a solução da TV. Não é? E recordo, aliás, uma experiência que uma vez visitei, da Nina, em São Paulo, de formação de professores. Portanto, aqui é a televisão pública que está a transmitir num dos seus canais, todo o dia, conteúdos para estudantes do nosso ensino básico, portanto, basicamente correspondendo a alunos dos 5 até aos 14 anos. TV. Pouco mais. E por isso uma diferença muito grande em termos de qualidade e em termos de equidade. Algumas universidades públicas, por exemplo, a Faculdade de Direito de Lisboa, está a assegurar também as suas classes a praticamente 100%. E a maioria das universidades privadas também. Portanto, ensino totalmente online. Demorou um pouco, as plataformas variam muito entre plataformas, enfim, totalmente gratuitas, estilo Moodle, outras que são plataformas que são pagas, mas a maior parte das universidades privadas está a funcionar à distância, muitas faculdades públicas, portanto, Faculdade de Direito de Lisboa, totalmente, também 100% das suas aulas online. Claro que isto demonstra uma enorme heterogeneidade na qualidade, não é, daquilo que entrega aos alunos, não é? O delivery, como há pouco falava a Nina Ranieri. O que é que vai resultar daqui? Ninguém sabe bem. E ninguém sabe bem, e é uma inquietação enorme, claro, em primeiro lugar dos decisores políticos, mas infelizmente também eles estão um pouco desaparecidos em combate em Portugal, Ministério da Educação, Ministério do Ensino Superior, reguladores, mas em especial de quem tem responsabilidade nas escolas e dos pais, que é como é que o próximo ano letivo, que em Portugal e na Europa começa em setembro, se vai iniciar. É sabido que em setembro, claro, a pandemia não desapareceu. É natural que todas as restrições sanitárias estejam a abrandar, mas não é possível, ou é dificilmente pensável, que 100% dos alunos vão estar nas aulas. Portanto, vai ser necessário ter soluções de blended learning, ensino híbrido, mas em que medida não é ainda claro. Não é claro para as universidades públicas e privadas, mas não é claro para, para as escolas. Eu ainda hoje, enfim, estava aqui a ver num dos nossos jornais mais conhecidos, bem, ver se consigo abrir, e não sei se conseguem ver, portanto, este é um dos jornais nossos aqui, referência em Portugal, o Público, e aqui uma pessoa de referência também, o artigo era Trus, está alguém no Ministério da Educação, exatamente porque faltam respostas, já não para este ano letivo vai terminar, porque enfim, o ano letivo termina em julho, mas as aulas terminam no início de junho, na verdade a maior parte das escolas termina hoje, as suas classes, que é feriado em Portugal. Mas sobretudo o que está a inquietar muito é e o próximo ano. E o próximo ano, quais são as diretrizes? É recuperar aquilo que não se deu no final do ano anterior, mas em relação às crianças, sobretudo aquelas mais pequenas, cuja instrução é fundamentalmente de socialização, não é transmissão só de conhecimentos, é socialização, regras básicas de socialização. Será que isso se perdeu ou não? Como é que se recupera? E aí faltam respostas dos decisores políticos, não é? E são, em grande parte, decisões que têm que ser técnicas, não é? Respostas científicas de pedagogos, de pessoas das ciências da educação e outras. Por isso, indo aqui a uma daquelas perguntas que foi colocada, o ensino profissional, que em Portugal é um ensino secundário, portanto, correspondendo a 12º ano de escolaridades obrigatórias, está também suspenso. Portanto, não está a haver aulas nesse ensino profissional e, de um modo geral, não está a haver nenhumas atividades para esses meninos. E isso é uma inquietação muito grande para todos, pedagogos, pais. Há pouco também se falava sobre o aumento, o Ian também falava sobre isso, o aumento muito grande de outras patologias sociais que estão a acontecer por todo o lado, não é? Violência sobre crianças, ciberbullying, que é hoje uma realidade também muito inquietante e, claro, é favorecida por toda esta situação do digital. E, portanto, este é um ano realmente completamente atípico. Não é? Eu costumo dar como exemplo, e vou terminar também só com esta observação, não é? No geral, todos nós, nas universidades, o Estado e até o mundo, o Fórum Económico Mundial, têm instrumentos e instituições de planeamento. Mas realmente esta crise foi totalmente inesperada. Ninguém, a nenhum nível, estava preparado para o alcance, para a duração até desta pandemia, e por isso estar a fazer projeções de como é que vamos recuperar o tempo perdido é realmente um exercício de uma enormíssima complexidade. Aquilo que nós estamos a verificar em Portugal, e vou terminar com isso, é que há, e noutros países, mas também não em todos, é que tem havido grandes consensos, não é? Consensos políticos, consensos sociais, em relação ao tipo de respostas que se estão a dar. Portanto, a política não se suspendeu totalmente, mas em qualquer dos casos tem sido possível um diálogo entre as diferentes forças políticas e também um diálogo a outros níveis, os Conselhos Nacionais de Educação e outros órgãos. E acho que sem esse enormíssimo consenso que tem que haver entre políticos, decisores sociais, decisores económicos, dificilmente os países vão ter capacidade para resolver os problemas que esta crise trouxe também no setor da educação. E o que seria dramático era que no final, como acontece, enfim, em todas as velhas fábulas, ganha o mais forte. Isso seria realmente terrível para a democracia e seria terrível para o pluralismo das nossas instituições.
Bem, professor.
Obrigado.
Obrigado, professor Barros.
Professor Heitor, Ugolino.
Olha, eu consultado sobre formação profissional, cursos de, chamaremos assim, de segundo grau ou até de terceiro grau de curta duração. Eu estou aqui com um artigo que eu escrevi em 1978, que tem como título Tecnólogos, precisamos deles cada vez mais. Eu me lembro que eu estava como membro do Conselho Federal de Educação e foi feito um esforço, naquela época, de aproximar a universidade da empresa, porque o profissional que nós estamos formando na área tecnológica, principalmente, vai trabalhar na empresa. E é preciso que a empresa diga quais as especialidades, e esses cursos eram cursos de 2.500 horas de formação, e isso precisava também ter uma oportunidade de entrar na empresa para fazer estágios, parte do treinamento desse curso. E na Universidade Federal de São Carlos, nós conseguimos fazer isso no curso de engenharia. Os alunos saíram 6 meses da universidade para trabalhar numa empresa fazendo um estágio. E depois voltavam para a universidade para completar o seu curso. E temos uma experiência muito boa no Brasil nesse sentido. O setor empresarial tem uma série de organizações, SESI, SENAC, enfim, que estão organizadas pelos diferentes setores da economia, que trabalham também para a formação profissional, paralela ao currículo de educação. Na verdade, isso é muito importante, porque abre a possibilidade de ampliar o número de alunos que se formam pensando no mercado profissional. Agora, depois da pandemia, nós vamos ter um problema real, oferecer emprego para vários profissionais que foram despedidos do seu trabalho e que têm que estar qualificados para essas demandas do pós-pandemia. Parte vai ser repetição do anterior, mas parte vão ser novas demandas e é preciso, então, preparar profissionais para preencher essas novas demandas. Eu creio que esse é um tema importante que os governos, em particular aqui no nosso país, vai precisar fazer. A formação que é a nível federal, a nível dos estados e, na verdade, até dos municípios, porque lembro que no Brasil a educação chamada primária é responsabilidade dos municípios, a secundária é do estado e a terciária é parte do governo federal e do setor público e do setor privado. Então, as demandas são diferentes É preciso montar cursos para oferecer a preparação adequada para cada uma dessas áreas. Eu acho que esse é um ponto importante que foi mencionado e quem fez a pergunta deve estar preocupado em como é que vai ser organizado esse setor após a nossa pandemia. No Brasil, temos já uma estrutura. Essa colaboração com o setor privado é importante. Temos que aproveitar isso e, provavelmente, criar novas oportunidades. Um bom desafio para o nosso país e para os países em desenvolvimento, de maneira geral.
Gostou da Nina agora?
Bem, nesses minutos finais, eu mais uma vez gostaria de cumprimentar os organizadores, foi extremamente interessante, aprendi muita coisa aqui hoje, e nas minhas palavras finais eu gostaria apenas de estressar e de ressaltar essa dificuldade em relação ao Brasil, que a Covid está trazendo no campo da educação, porque isso, num país desigual como o nosso, e onde a diferença de renda alcança patamares inacreditáveis, eu vou apenas mencionar para vocês algo que eu ouvi neste final de semana, que há brasileiros fretando aviões particulares para voltarem a Miami, uma vez que tudo abriu lá, a um custo elevadíssimo, aviões particulares de cerca de 13 lugares, ao custo de quase R$1 milhão, para não terem risco de contaminação e poderem continuar levando sua vida como se nada ocorresse no país. Quer dizer, isso não é de ouvir dizer, isso me contaram, é uma realidade. Quer dizer, num país com diferenças de renda sabidamente conhecidas, extremadas, diante de uma situação em que nós vamos involuir com a educação pública, onde falta recurso para tudo, onde falta acesso, onde falta equidade, nós temos um grande desafio pela frente. E eu gostaria muito de sensibilizar todos os que nos ouvem, que não aceitem essa condição. Nós precisamos falar dessas iniquidades e dessas diferenças que vão se acentuar daqui para frente devido a essa situação que nós não tínhamos como prever, não sabemos como enfrentar, e que, do ponto de vista econômico, aponta para uma recessão como nunca vista no país. A situação que o Pedro descreve em Portugal é muito semelhante à situação brasileira, mas, repito, aqui o grau é muito maior, as iniquidades são muito maiores e as dificuldades serão muito maiores. É uma pena que o nosso país esteja vivendo essa situação e que as novas gerações vão ser impactadas como nós não fomos, porque a nossa geração ainda teve a oportunidade de viver situações e circunstâncias de maior desenvolvimento. Então, eu peço a todos aqueles que nos ouvem, não aceitem essas iniquidades, falem sobre elas, é preciso falar, não podemos aceitar. E eu espero que, num futuro de médio prazo, minimamente, nós possamos recuperar o que estamos vivendo. Então, Carlos, Saulo, parabéns pelo seminário, justamente pela oportunidade de refletirmos sobre essas injustiças aqui no nosso país. Muito obrigada.
Nós aqui agradecemos, professora, a sua participação. Teve uma pergunta que foi encaminhada, professor Saulo, tratando sobre a judicialização educacional, instituições que estão sendo demandadas em face a suposto desrespeito do contrato firmado com os particulares. Eu queria só traçar um breve comentário, professor Saulo, em relação a isso, porque, infelizmente, nós não podemos, via admitir também, professora Nina, transformar a educação num bem de consumo. E as famílias, elas também, por vezes, buscam uma resposta por parte de um magistrado ou magistrada que não tem noção da realidade que passam também as instituições educacionais em relação ao assunto. Então, nossa perspectiva é de que haja sempre uma mediação, uma discussão por parte de todos os atores envolvidos, os pais, os contratantes, os professores, os dirigentes, porque já imaginemos uma decisão que venha a criar um precedente de necessariamente toda instituição ter que reduzir 20% da mensalidade. Ora, quais foram os parâmetros racionais, objetivos, dogmáticos para que essa decisão tenha sido tomada? Então, todas as decisões vão seguir necessariamente aquele precedente? Então, professor Saulo, nossa preocupação, é claro que as instituições não podem de forma alguma impor a manutenção das mensalidades como estão em alguns casos ocorrendo, mas antes de partir para uma prestação judicial, que haja uma discussão ampla, professora Nina, com a sociedade aberta educacional, né, todos os atores envolvidos, né, os professores, os alunos, os responsáveis, o que é que está correndo em relação à instituição, até porque, como o professor Barbas me colocou, cada instituição tem suas peculiaridades. Cada curso também tem suas características próprias. Então, nós não podemos simplesmente observar uma decisão tomada por um tribunal e achar que todo o Brasil necessariamente vai ter que ter desconto no percentual X. Então, só para não deixar, né, a pergunta que foi encaminhada sem a devida reflexão. Professores, a gente vai encaminhar agora para o final. O professor Rodolfo Pamplona, presidente da Academia de Letras Jurídicas, está presente. Ele é o nosso coordenador também geral. Ele vai encerrar o evento e a gente agradece efusivamente, né, a participação de todos vocês. Já estamos aí há 2h30, né, 2h30 de evento. O evento foi riquíssimo. Ele está sendo gravado e vai ser depois encaminhado, né, para todos os senhores, para que mantenham contato e venham a divulgar para aqueles interessados. O professor Rodolfo Pamplona está presente?
Rates, antes do professor, já que ele vai encerrar, deixe-me somente agradecer a professora Nina, professor Barbazon e professor Heitor. Ficamos enriquecidos com as exposições e com tudo que vimos hoje aqui. Obrigado pela presença de todos. Professor Rodolfo, meu colega e amigo.
Para mim é uma honra poder presidir, co-presidir e fazer o encerramento, registrando a enorme satisfação da Academia de Letras Jurídicas da Bahia de organizar mais uma etapa. Já são 11 seminários virtuais, estamos numa projeção aí para mais 3, pelo menos, com lançamento, inclusive, também de obras, né? Vamos fazer o lançamento da segunda obra, vamos organizar a terceira obra. Então, há, nesse ponto, sem sombra de dúvida, uma grande satisfação. Quero dizer também que eu subscrevo integralmente as palavras do professor Hatz. Estou na magistratura há 25 anos e, nesse ponto, acho que essas atitudes de redução unilateral e impessoal e de percentuais é um voluntarismo que fere especificamente o equilíbrio econômico da própria atividade, sem uma demonstração efetiva. É preciso parar com essa ideia do Poder Judiciário querer resolver todos os problemas da humanidade, que não vai, é simplesmente uma ideia de cada um pensar o seu. Nós precisamos realmente exortar as pessoas para soluções negociadas, que possam, nesse ponto, empoderar os profissionais da advocacia, principalmente nesse ponto, e não a magistratura, né, para poder negociar efetivamente dentro de cada uma das situações. Sem prejuízo, naturalmente, de demonstrações objetivas, de redução, de tutelas coletivas, mas é preciso efetivamente pensar com bastante seriedade esse tema. E dizer da enorme satisfação de realizar o primeiro evento nesse ponto absolutamente internacional, mas com essa possibilidade de voltar a falar português aqui no final. Aí agradeço publicamente a doutora Nina por ter me permitido aí também voltar ao idioma pátrio. E registrar também a enorme satisfação a todos os palestrantes que ficam, desde já, convidados a participar das obras coletivas e convidados a participar também dos próximos seminários, aí como assistência qualificadíssima, que muito nos honrará. Um abraço a todos e todas e nós nos encontramos na semana que vem. Está encerrado, Evan.
Boa semana a todos, saúde para as famílias.
Boa semana a todos. Um abraço, meu amigo Heitor.
Um abraço.
Agora, professor Bazão, professora Nina. Abraço.